We had tried calling the cops. We had tried doing everything. Nothing worked. Nothing.
After hearing 59-year-old Lee Woolard's story, you may think he did what any family man would do. Or you may agree with a Florida jury and think he went too far. But either way, you're likely to wonder, does Woolard's punishment really fit the crime?
Never, never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be here. I still have a hard time believing it. It's unbelievable.
Lee Woolard's troubles began 6 years ago. He was a professional with a master's degree in Davenport, Florida, living with his wife and their 2 daughters and working at SeaWorld. When his youngest daughter, Sarah, began dating a 17-year-old troubled teenager with no place to live, Woolard and his wife, Sandy, took him in.
You know, if someone needs help, we'll help them.
Did it go okay initially?
For about a week.
It started out, his behavior was fine. I'd ask him if he would take the garbage out or clear off the table, and it was, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am.
But Sandy Woolard says the relationship with the boy, whom we agreed not to identify, soon soured.
This young man was taking my daughter out at night after we had put her to bed, and we had gone to bed. And he was disappearing with her. He would disappear for days at a time with her. And she's 16 years old.
The Woolards asked him to leave, but nothing kept him out of the house until May 14, 2008. As Lee was taking a nap, his daughter and her boyfriend began to fight. You heard a loud noise.
Yeah, it was like you were throwing stuff against the wall, like you had a tennis ball and you're just boom, you know. But
then came cries for help. What did you think?
I had no idea. You know, it's not like my family to ask for help. So I grabbed my .357 and loaded it with shells.
That's a large gun.
It's a heck of a gun. Yes, you even wing someone with a .357, they're in deep trouble.
According to Woolard, the young man lunged at him and punched this hole in a wall. The teenager disputes that, but no one disagrees about what happened next.
So I fire a warning shot into the wall. I said, the next one's between the eyes.
And the kid turned around and just hurried out the door. And that was the end of that.
Not quite. Woolard was charged with shooting into a building with a firearm, aggravated assault, and child endangerment. And when he went on trial a year later, a jury convicted him of all charges. And then Judge Donald Jacobson sentenced him. You sentenced him to how long?
I sentenced him to 20 years in Florida State Prison, which is the mandatory minimum.
20 years.
And what that means is that he will serve every day of 20 years in state prison.
And I was just like, what? You know, the blood just drained down my head. I almost passed out.
It didn't matter that Lee Woolard was a first offender or that no one was physically injured. In Florida, a conviction for aggravated assault involving a firearm means an automatic 20 years. That's the mandatory minimum sentence.
I looked at him and told him that I would not be sentencing you to this term of incarceration, 20 years Florida State Prison, if it were not for the fact that I was obligated under my oath as a judge to do so.
But that had to be difficult.
Being a judge is difficult.
Woolard's case is just one of thousands in this country, most involving drug offenses, in which the punishment is determined by mandatory sentencing laws. Laws created by legislators who strip away power from judges they believe to be too lenient and give it instead to prosecutors.
It's an invaluable tool for prosecutors and law enforcement to use because it gives us leverage.
Stephen Jansen runs the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys in Washington, D.C. He says that defendants, when faced with harsh mandatory sentences, are more likely to negotiate a plea bargain, avoiding lengthy, costly trials. And the sentencing is more fair, he says. But is it really? When you have these mandatory minimum sentences, aren't you treating the violent career criminals the same way as you're treating the first offenders nonviolent? They get the same sentence.
But justice is blind. And so it doesn't matter what status you are in our society. If you commit these crimes and fulfill the elements of the crime, blind justice will charge you with that, and you should receive equal sentence just as anybody else that committed that same crime.
I never advised him when I was...
That was the thinking in the late 1980s, when mandatory sentencing became a popular tough-on-crime tool as part of the government's war on drugs, locking away not just drug dealers, but often their customers, many young first offenders.
And it seemed so contrary to everything I thought I had learned in Civics 101 that judges can't judge now when the crimes carry mandatory minimum sentences.
Julie Stewart started the advocacy group Families Against Mandatory Minimums. She says Lee Woolard's 20-year sentence is not as unusual as you may think. Take the case of Weldon Angelos, a music producer with no previous record, who in 2004 was sentenced to 55 years in prison for selling marijuana worth $350 to undercover cops who found a firearm in his possession.
I'm not a criminal.
And then there's 19-year-old first-time offender Jacob Lavoro in Texas. He's now facing up to 20 years in prison after getting caught with a tray of hash brownies.
No one is saying people shouldn't go to prison for committing a crime. I think that whether you like the law or not, it exists. If you violate it, there's a consequence to it. So what we say is that the judge should be able to determine what the punishment is, not a legislator, not a prosecutor.
Stewart blames mandatory sentencing for prison overcrowding. Since 1980, the average sentence for drug trafficking has more than doubled, from 4 years to 9.5. And even Stephen Jansen admits sometimes the wrong people are incarcerated.
Unfortunately, you have these situations where people who think they are innocent decide to go to trial instead of accepting a plea offer, and they end up receiving a more severe sentence than what maybe a gang member or drug dealer would have taken.
Which is what happened to Lee Woolard. The prosecutor offered you probation. No jail sentence.
Right.
And you didn't take it.
It never dawned on me that I would lose because I hadn't done anything wrong. I protected my family, and I didn't even hurt anybody.
And Woolard's sentence seems particularly harsh, says his wife, when you consider that in Florida, if you happen to kill someone while standing your ground in self-defense, you may face no charges at all.
But if you shoot a warning shot just to scare them away, you'll get 20 years in prison.
The Polk County State's attorney, whose office prosecuted Woolard, refused to discuss his case. But nationally, there is a move to return some discretion to judges. Earlier this year, federal sentencing guidelines were amended to reduce prison time. And in Florida, the legislature passed a law that exempts firing warning shots from the current harsh penalties. But it comes too late for Woolard.
Everything is gone.
Woolard has asked the Florida governor for clemency, which incidentally, his daughter's former boyfriend supports. If he doesn't get it, Lee Woolard will leave prison in July 2028, when he is 73 years old.
As bizarre as it sounds, if this is what the state of Florida requires of you to make sure your family is safe, I'm willing to do it. It's a bargain. I've got 3 family members, my 2 daughters and my wife, and they're alive. They're alive because of this. It's a bargain. 20 years is a bargain.